we are going to talk about innovation, Tara. And one of the critical pointers for innovation is being curious and asking questions. And actually, scientific approach is apparently ask at least 5 questions to narrow down and actually understand. And it's very often used in startups. I'm a startup founder and a mentor, and I'm really passionate about narrowing down the why. So when it comes to innovation, what other critical pointers would you mention that are critical in the process of innovation?
So to me, there's two really critical things, and both of them come back to organizational culture. There was a study that was done by a company here in the United States called Boston Consulting Group, and they determined over, I don't know how long it took, they interviewed 1,700 companies over 7 or 8 countries, showed that the more diverse a company is, the more likely it is that they are benefiting financially from innovation. Here's this chart.
Here we are, the Boston Consulting Group. Companies with above average diversity also have higher innovation revenues.
You know, there's a really good reason for that, right? A homogenous set of employees, let's say in the Bay Area, if everybody who was your employee had graduated from Berkeley or Stanford, for example, you are over-indexing on their experience, the classes that they took, the professors that they learned from. There is not a lot of opportunity for innovation because everybody has the same background. If instead you have a mixture of Berkeley and Stanford and perhaps San Jose State, which is a public college here in the Bay Area, as well as other schools across the country or even the world, or even people who did not go to school who are self-taught in computer science or computer science type fields, that's a variety of thought process and viewpoint and experience that collectively, you hope, allows for that innovation to potentially emerge. You have people interacting with each other, feeding each other ideas, bouncing ideas off of each other. From there, you get that expanded experience. Now that's part one. Part two is the other side, and again, it's cultural, which is how does your organization handle experimentation, support it? I describe innovation as being the result of fearless creativity. I'm a big fan of the DevOps philosophy. I think we've talked about that a little bit. And there was a DevOps report and the Accelerate book that was written about it. One of the things they called out was the cultural element of what makes organizations more successful. And there was a sociologist named Ron Westrom who described different types of organizational cultures, from the pathological, which is kind of the stereotypical, boss man, nobody tells the boss man no. If a messenger brings bad news, they're fired, that sort of extreme example. The other side of that is generative, which is there's a shared sense of ownership and responsibility, and that failures are not punished, but rather rewarded. And just that simple idea is so incredibly powerful, because if you feel like if you have an idea and you fail at trying to execute it, you're going to get fired or demoted or some other negative aspect, you don't really feel inspired to try it. And yet, unless you're willing to try these ideas to see what works, what doesn't work, and most importantly, when it doesn't work, understand why in a successful and positive way, you're not going to get that. So those two things, I think, are super critical to innovation. Not being overly committed to a particular type of employee, go wide. That can be educational backgrounds, ethnic background, gender, could include any number of things. And then have this concept of the Western generative culture, meaning that as an organization, we support each other in having these really cool ideas and trying them and learning from the failures and trying again. These two things together are what make for a successful financial outcome in the end. Also is really good for retaining employees.
Oh, definitely. We just had a first comment from Fran, who was one of the speakers, completely agreed that diversity is an innovator and enabler. Building a company culture does not mean having Xerox companies, but a diverse, agile, and mobile strategy which harnesses the best out of a diverse talent pool. Because none of us can get to ideas on our own. We need that creative power, and we need that challenging process of disruption. I'm just wondering, how is it in your company? How do you hire people? We actually talked with Fran Moisa some time ago about avoiding people who are the no people. So you need to have the ability of saying yes. And how do you actually see the assignment in the rough?
I actually wrote a blog post about this idea. So in general, Google has a system that I obviously am now familiar with. I have my own sort of experience in almost 30 years of hiring people in high-tech industry. And I always say that two most important things that I look for in an employee are smart and motivated. If you're smart, you can learn, and the industry is constantly changing. The programming languages are constantly evolving. Half the languages that are tier 1 languages at Google, for example, didn't exist when I got into this industry originally. So it's like being an expert at any particular thing isn't necessarily valuable. It could be helpful for some set of problems, but it's how well are you able and willing to learn? And then motivated is that you are able and willing to learn, and that you're interested in the problems that a given company is solving. You know, I've worked at companies that were e-commerce companies that did SaaS software. I've worked at Pixar. I've worked at a VR company. Not everybody is appropriate for every company. You have to find the people with the smarts and the motivation for the company's products. Once you have that, everything else is just a matter of time and details. And so when you interview, like, okay, I got a bachelor's degree in computer science. Do not ask me what order of efficiency, you know, binary tree search is. I learned that 30 years ago. I haven't used it since. If somebody asks me that in an interview, I'm not going to go to that company because you're asking me something that's going to have nothing to do with my job. You have to really understand, what problems do you need to solve? Ask the candidate, how would you solve this problem? Have a good brainstorming session with you, and you came out of that with some ideas. Like, that's probably the employee that you want to have, right? They may not know how to solve it, but they just gave you some ideas. They just came up with something in an interview that's actionable. That's valuable. So it's really changing that approach and not overemphasizing skills that they're not going to use.